A couple days ago, I put out a video in which I explained how, in my assessment, after hearing the ARCCA experts, which largely went uncontradicted, unless you want to call Trooper Paul on the same level as these biomechanical engineers. We'll get to that a little bit later in the video also. But their opinion was largely uncontradicted, and their opinions were that the injuries to John O'Keefe and the damage to the vehicle were inconsistent with this being a pedestrian versus motor vehicle interaction. And therefore, in my mind, once I heard that and it was uncontradicted, then that meant that the Commonwealth did not satisfy their burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Reed committed this murder, definitely in the way that they suggested, that she backed up her car into John O'Keefe. Now, we devoted last video to discussing the question that a lot of people have been asking, and that is that if they did not have all of the evidence, if the ARCCA experts did not see all of the evidence and did not have all the data points which are necessary in order to come to their opinions and conclusions, well, then shouldn't we be able to discount their conclusions? After all, they did not have all the evidence. You've got to have all the evidence before coming to your conclusion. And we spoke about that in the last video, but I want to discuss a little bit more in today's video because people were still continually asking this type of question, even despite my best attempts at last video to explain it. So let me try to explain a little bit differently in this video why, in my mind, the way you have to analyze that is in two different ways. Okay, let's talk about the first way. If they did not have all the evidence, and like I said, this is a common line of cross-examination. This is why attorneys do it. This is why Adam Lally employed it. You always want to point out what information the experts did not have, and sometimes it can be very, very damaging. And I've gotten I had myself some gotcha moments with cross-examination when I'm dealing with an expert. But the question that you always have to ask yourself is whether that information that they did not have is important enough in order for them to come to their conclusion. So, for example, if you're trying to cross-examine an expert and you point out, you did not have this piece of information, did you? And the person says, yeah, I know, because you don't need that you don't need that information. And you don't have a doctor, you don't have some sort of expert on your side that's going to say, yes, you do need that information if you want to come to a solid conclusion. Well, then it's just you as a lawyer arguing your point to the jury when you don't have any expert to back you up and say that, yes, this data point is important and necessary in order for this expert to come to their conclusion. So number one is the following fact. You're right that they did not actually see the vehicle of the car. And that's a point that Adam Lally pointed out. You know what else they didn't see? They didn't see the body of John O'Keefe. They just saw pictures of the injuries to John O'Keefe. And I didn't hear Adam Lally ask that question. Well, you didn't see the body of John O'Keefe. Now, he could have asked that question also, but he didn't. Maybe for strategic reasons. But he could have asked that question. You didn't see the body. You didn't see the actual vehicle. You didn't see the DNA reports of that hair that was on the bumper. And you also didn't see the report from Trooper Paul, which, of course, Adam Lally has to do his best. So you have to always obviously show the jury what pieces of information they did not have. But the experts were very good at saying, yes, we didn't see that, but it wasn't necessary. We had sufficient evidence with the pictures. And some people that didn't sound right to them because, you should see the actual car. So the first thing that you have to establish, the first thing you have to think about, just if you want to analyze this logically, is that actually a necessary component? And who says that it is? So if it's just a lawyer, if it's just a random person out there saying, yeah, of course you need to see all the information. Well, do you have any biomechanical engineer experience? Do you have experience to analyzing how traffic accident reconstruction can occur and why you actually need to see the physical vehicle or not? Do you have any opinion about that? Why would you need to see the actual video, the actual car itself? Do you need to see the actual body in order to determine the extent of the injuries, or are pictures enough? And that's the first point. So as long as the Commonwealth did not have an expert to say that, or a biomechanical expert, someone to say that, yes, if you are a biomechanical engineer and you want to do an accident reconstruction, you must, if you want your opinion to be reliable, you must actually see the physical vehicle itself. Then you might have an argument. For all the people out there making the argument that they didn't see the actual physical vehicle, you may have an argument. But just for us laymen to say, well, if he didn't have that, then that means that his opinions are unreliable. It's I think not honest. I don't think it's an honest, logical conclusion because we don't know what biomechanical engineers need. So, for example, I'm a lawyer, right? So you give me a file to look over and give my opinion about whether there's a case or not. So you give it to me and I look over, I see the medical records, I see the police report, I see accident reconstruction report, and I see enough. And I say, look, I saw enough and I'm telling you right now, you don't have a case. Now, as a layman who doesn't know anything about law, and you look at my testimony and say, well, you didn't have this record. And I would tell you, I know I didn't have that record. I don't need that record because I have enough information to tell you whether this is the case or not. Well, then you shouldn't be able to be the one to say, well, no, because you know better than me, right? I mean, at least I'm coming from a position where I'm an expert in my field. So here, if you have an expert like a biomechanical engineer, and they're saying, and both of them said, understand, we don't need pictures of the actual vehicle. And it happens to be that they're independent in this case, even though some people want to argue that they're not independent. But let's just say they were not hired by the defense. They were not hired by the prosecution. Well, then that makes them more independent and more reliable. So unless and until you have from the Commonwealth an expert that's going to say that that's wrong, that you actually, as a biomechanical engineer, and they would have to get some other biomechanical engineer on the stand, and then for them to say, I'm telling you, you actually have to see and do an inspection on the physical vehicle itself. And because they didn't, their opinion is unreliable, then all this talk about it is just not, I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's logical, because I think you need someone in that field to say that what that person needs in order to come to their conclusion. The rest of us are all laymen, and we don't understand really what's necessary for a biomechanical engineer to come to their conclusion. The same way you can't tell me, if you're not a lawyer, when I'm reviewing a file, what I need to see before I tell you whether there's a case or not. So I think that's point number one. Point number two is that even if we want to think about this logically, let's just think about it without that backdrop, without needing an expert witness to testify about what you actually need to see as a biomechanical engineer before coming to conclusion. Even without that, let's just think about it. Let's just work through logically what their scope of work is and logically try to understand what they need to see in order to come to the conclusion of what their task is, right? What are they tasked with? They're tasked with here. These are the injuries. This is the damage to the vehicle. Okay. This is essentially basically what it is. Damage to the vehicle, injuries to the body, and the lack of injuries to the body. That's also an important part, right? These are the injuries that the person did sustain. These are the injuries that the person did not sustain. This is the damage to the vehicle that the vehicle had sustained, and this is the part of the vehicle that was not damaged at all. And now plug that in to some sort of physics equation, figure out do some sort of reconstruction, how this equals this. How does the damage to this vehicle equal the injuries that were on this person? If you can't do that, so then what's it going to help to actually look at the physical vehicle itself? If I can tell you the only way by looking at the pictures, right? The only way to get this type of damage to the car is one of three ways, and none of them are the Commonwealth theory. Well, then what's it going to help? Why does it make a difference whether I actually see the vehicle itself? If the scope of my work is figure out scientifically, do a reconstruction, and tell me how these injuries result from an interaction with this vehicle where the damage of the vehicle was this, and you can't figure it out from pictures, well, what are the chances you're going to be able to figure it out from actually looking at the physical vehicle itself? So I think even logically, even if the Commonwealth does not have an expert to say that you actually need to look at the vehicle, just thinking about what they're trying to reconstruct, you would, I think, logically come to the conclusion that pictures should be sufficient. So that's two reasons. Now, there's also another part about this, which is also, I've been getting questions as a result from last video and from my entire time covering the Karen Reed case. And the questions go like this. They ask some other questions. Karen Reed was drunk that night. She was drunk driving. Do you really believe the conspiracy? Do you believe that all these people would lie on the stand? What about the phone connecting, the phone not connecting? Maybe this happened, maybe that happened, right? So this is how I want to tell you how I approach looking at these cases. I look at these cases simply as a lawyer does, from the perspective of a lawyer, which means that I'm looking at who the burden is on and what they have to prove. If in my mind they haven't proven their case, then it doesn't bother me what actually happened in this case. I don't have to investigate this case. I don't have to tell you what actually happened in this case. And by the way, this should also be stressed to the jurors. Jurors, you don't have to understand what happened in this case. You don't have to know what happened in this case. Again, if you're on the defense side, you explain to the jurors, we're not asking you to be investigators on this case. All you have to do is to judge whether the Commonwealth proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. If they did not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, you can have 25 unanswered questions and it shouldn't bother you, because all you're here to determine is whether the Commonwealth proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So when people ask me, do you really believe that there was a conspiracy here? Do you really believe that 20 people would get up on there, or 10 people would get up on the stand and lie? Do you really believe that? And my answer to that is, I don't know what to believe about that. I can't tell you whether there's a conspiracy or not. I haven't seen enough evidence of that. Yeah, so certain things may point to that. Certain things don't point to that. It doesn't really bother me, because that's not what's on trial here. The trial is not about whether there was a conspiracy or not. Yes, I know that the defense tried to present that argument, but the defense doesn't have to prove anything in this case. The burden is on the defense to prove anything. The burden is on the Commonwealth to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And as soon as I hear these ARCCA experts saying that, scientifically speaking, it's inconsistent, the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to John O'Keefe are inconsistent with this being a pedestrian versus motor vehicle accident or motor vehicle interaction, well then, if it doesn't work in science, so then that's enough reasonable doubt for me. And again, remember, the only thing that you have to have is reasonable doubt. It's not about figuring out what actually happened. Do I have a reasonable doubt that, since two people, experts who have no one as contradicted, has said that this is scientifically not consistent to happening the way the Commonwealth said that it happened, you can ask 25 questions on that. But if I still have a reasonable doubt to believe these experts, which is why I keep saying, even if, again, I'm taking a jump here because I don't even know what the Commonwealth experts may say, but even if the Commonwealth gets some biomechanical engineers, and even if they get some experts to contradict these other ARCCA experts, and everybody stays the same, again, there's a big if everybody just stays the same, and the only difference is that you have one expert that says, yes, it is consistent in the science. And you have another two experts, these biomechanical engineers who are extremely qualified. They say, we're sticking with our opinion after we've seen everything by the second trial. Let's just play it out. Assuming that we saw everything and our opinions have not changed, we still believe that, scientifically speaking, it's not possible for this to have happened the way that the Commonwealth is saying. How does that not have at least a reasonable doubt? It doesn't have a reasonable doubt in your mind? So again, if that's how you're looking at this case and you're not being forced to pick sides, because I think that's where people end up in this case when they're following this case, that's how they end up picking sides. I don't pick sides. I just look at the standard, I look at the burden, and then I say, look, in my opinion, I saw the evidence. They haven't met their burden. What actually happened? Do I believe in conspiracy? Did Karen Read actually kill John O'Keefe? Maybe she did. I don't know. Maybe she did kill him. But I can tell you this, that the Commonwealth just simply did not meet their burden. That's all. That's all I'm telling you. It could be Karen Read killed John O'Keefe. It could be that she was drunk. She most likely was drunk. So she was driving drunk. Yeah, she probably shouldn't have done that. Did the car go into reverse 24 miles per hour? Yeah, sure. Let's say it did. Let's say it did go in reverse 24 miles per hour. It doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me, because still, at the end of the day, these ARCCA experts said that this interaction didn't happen. Scientifically speaking, it's not consistent with this interaction happening. And therefore, even if you prove to me, even if I were to accept that the car went 24 miles per hour backwards, and that Karen Read was drunk, and that she was in a toxic relationship, and that she was mad at John O'Keefe, and in fact, I'll take it a step further. Even if you were to discover that Karen Read texted somebody, then I am going to run over John O'Keefe tonight at 12 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to do it in front of 34 Fairview. That's exactly how I'm going to kill him. And she texts this to a friend, and they find this text message in the second trial, and they put it out on the screen to show the entire jury. And you still have these two experts testifying that it's inconsistent. I still think that that's reasonable doubt. I'm sorry. You know why? Because I live in a world of science. And this is what I would be arguing to the jury if I was the defense. Even if you would have all this damning evidence, I would still say, look, we live in a world of science. We trust science every single day. We walk outside because we assume we're not going to be floating away into outer space because we have gravity. So if you want to live in a world of science, the science in this case says that this interaction never happened. So even if you have the car going 24 miles per hour backwards, even if you have that she's drunk, even if you have that she's extremely mad at John O'Keefe and she leaves terrible voice messages, and even if she would have texted somebody that I'm telling you I'm going to run him over with a car tonight, still, the science doesn't support this theory of the Commonwealth. Maybe she killed him another way. I don't know. Maybe she did. But I can tell you one thing. Scientifically, based on the evidence that we've saw that came out in trial, she did not back that car up into John O'Keefe and hit him that way. At least he didn't die that way. Now, maybe she went 24 miles per hour. Maybe she stopped him. Who knows? I don't know what happened. But that's not my job. My job is not to understand what actually happened in this case. My job is just to decide whether, based on the evidence, the Commonwealth has met their burden. And I think it's very clear after the ARCCA experts testified that they simply did not meet their burden, because there's definitely at least a reasonable doubt that the experts actually know what they're talking about. And when the experts say that I don't need that information, that at least is a reasonable doubt that they don't actually need to see that the physical vehicle, and they don't have to actually see the DNA reports. And whether there was a hair on the car or not, still the science does not support that this was an interaction between a vehicle and a pedestrian. So unless and until the prosecution of the Commonwealth can show why these biomechanical engineers made an error, and maybe perhaps in their calculations. And by the way, somebody also said, oh, they didn't see any reports or they didn't make any videos. There definitely was a report in this case. Reports are not admissible into evidence, but there's definitely a report that they were talking about. So they definitely made a report on this case. There's no question about it. They didn't do a video on the case. That's possible. They didn't do a video, but they still did a report. And then again, because it comes down to their actual testimony in court, so that's why they actually testified in open court about what their conclusions were. So I hope I cleared this all up for you, and why, looking at this from a lawyer's perspective, and when you have those experts on the stand testifying to what they did, and there's no sort of contradiction, and even though some people say, well, they didn't say that the car didn't hit him. They didn't say absolutely that she didn't hit him with the car. They just said that the Commonwealth's theory was not consistent with the injuries. But it could be that she still hit all these questions and all these possibilities. Yeah, maybe it's possible, but the Commonwealth didn't prove it. That's the problem. The Commonwealth's theory, according to these experts, is not scientifically based. It's not consistent with the science. We live in a world of science. And since we live in a world of science where we rely on science every single day, I think that at the very least, that should create reasonable doubt. So hopefully I cleared things up now with the second video, but I'm sure there'll be some more comments that we might have to address in another video. But that'll be it for now. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.